Alex, thank you so much. I know as we joked around a little bit, you've been doing a lot of these, so you're even seeing some familiar faces this morning. But I do want to thank you for spending time with Tri-County, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Eileen, and I thank you for that introduction. It is really a pleasure to be with you this morning. Obviously, continues to be under tough circumstances, and as much as I would prefer to be with you all in person, having this opportunity to meet, especially for me to hear from you all on some of your experiences, really on the ground, certainly to have a discussion and hopefully answer any questions you have is a great opportunity for me. So I do appreciate it. As we were discussing, there have been at the PA Chamber, we have been doing a lot of webinars like this, Zoom meetings with local chambers, and it's been candidly, it's been one of the more fun parts of my job, because it's been so gratifying to see how the chamber community has really stepped up statewide on behalf of Pennsylvania's businesses, on behalf of employers who I don't need to tell you all how challenging the environment is right now. We of course acknowledge the sort of the health side of this emergency situation, but the impact on businesses really can't be overstated, and it's devastating to think about an employer who actually created a successful company, which is so challenging under normal circumstances. Had a viable, successful company as recently as a few months ago, and now struggling to survive, or perhaps has closed up shop already. Really pretty tragic, but we also admire and appreciate the resiliency of Pennsylvania's business community. We'll talk a little bit today about our Bringing PA Back initiative that is really based on our knowledge of how Pennsylvania businesses can use their talent and creativity and ingenuity to bounce back, and hopefully we can all work together to create a legislative and a policy environment to facilitate that economic recovery that I know we all hope and pray is hope we're at the beginning stages of. So I thought to this morning talk a little bit about legislative update, briefly review kind of where things have been for the last few months. It has to be briefly, because we could spend all day talking about various legislative emergency response initiatives, and then talk about bringing PA back, both that specific initiative, but then more generally, and some of the legislation that we are advocating as part of that initiative, and then maybe talk a little bit of a political update. We had a primary election last week, heading into a general election, of course, in November. Talk a little bit about some of the details on that front. Would love for this to be an exchange. You're welcome to. We should have time at the end for discussion and Q&A. But if anything prompts a question or a comment, please feel free to just shout out. I definitely appreciate hearing your input. So in terms of the kind of the legislative response, both at the federal and state level, since early to mid-March or so, it has obviously been a steady stream of public policy response measures, both new responsibilities on employers, as well as some new opportunities and some ways that government has sought to help employers weather this storm. So back in mid-March, I think it was March 18th, Congress passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which required paid leave for individuals impacted by the pandemic, expanded Family and Medical Leave Act to cover employees whose children's schools were impacted, and ultimately that would really be every school. These provisions generally sought to not or the costs should be recoverable by employers through subsequent tax credits. That legislation also provided funding for states related to unemployment compensation, some funding for administrative costs, as well as actually helping states provide for benefits. That would be the first of a series of legislation related to unemployment compensation, as that program, as that system has really become one of the key areas that lawmakers have utilized in terms of the response. So we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Moving on, later in March, March 27th, Congress passed the CARES Act. We all got to know a lot about that. Emergency response, economic stimulus legislation. It was a $2 trillion piece of legislation that we were kind of just wrapping our heads around the scope. That provided for individual financial support, stimulus checks out to citizens, to individuals. That also created the Paycheck Protection Program loan, the PPP, which we've got, many employers have gotten to know well. This was intended or is a forgivable loan that if employers meet certain requirements in terms of how loan proceeds are spent, that they may qualify for forgiveness under that loan. That has been amended recently. The Ppp Flexibility Act was signed into law just within the past week or so, which changed some of the qualifications for employers to qualify for forgiveness under that act, generally to make it easier for those loans to be forgiven. But I think with many of the different programs that came up, and sort of the cliches have been overused in terms of learning as we go, and there's no playbook, and we're building the plane as it travels down the runway. They all kind of ring true. Many of these requirements or programs never existed or hadn't maybe even been contemplated before these measures were advanced, and we are sort of learning as we go. So I think, to the credit of lawmakers in Washington, D.C., just as an example, seeing how the PPP program was playing out, hearing feedback from employers on how they're administering it, and some of the challenges and some of their concerns with the ability to qualify for forgiveness under that program. Some of those concerns were responded to in the form of this new legislation. So again, happy to get into any details on that if there are questions. The CARES Act of March 27th also included significant expansions to unemployment compensation. Again, I warned you that would be a recurring theme here. Congress expanded eligibility for the program. For the first time, small business owners, independent contractors, so-called gig workers, or the self-employed who had never been eligible for unemployment compensation would now be eligible. The Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, or PUA, we're getting all these brand new acronyms. Some are more, easier to say than others. The PUA program was intended to expand eligibility to these different categories of individuals. Congress also created a $600 per week benefit enhancement for everyone. The moment you qualify for $1 of unemployment compensation, you qualify for the $600 enhancement. Of course, we were all seeing individuals in real crisis mode as mass layoffs were occurring. And it's strange to talk about this like it's like I'm giving a history lesson when it was only, a couple months ago. But it feels like a lot's happened since then. So, general support um, for that benefit enhancement. While there were some early voices saying, this is interesting. You're probably going to have some people who, between the $600 federal enhancement and what they'd be earning under unemployment comp under state law, may actually be making more money on unemployment than they make anyway. There were definitely some early voices. I can't say I was necessarily, one of them, but that kind of premonition or that prediction in the weeks and months to come would become more and more relevant. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. On the same day the CARES Act was passed, in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, the state legislature passed an unemployment compensation package, which included a number of provisions. It waived work search requirements and a number of other requirements on claimants to make it generally easier to qualify for benefits. It also provided for relief from charges. For those of you with companies that have experience with unemployment comp, this might be a very familiar topic. For others, maybe never heard of it. I really didn't before before being involved in unemployment comp policy. But generally, if you lay somebody off and they qualify for unemployment benefits, your taxes, your UC taxes, are probably going to go up. But there are circumstances in which you can qualify for relief from those charges. In other words, your taxes will not go up under certain circumstances. So if someone quits their job for personal reasons and still qualifies for benefits, you might be relieved of those charges. Well, the legislature said under these conditions, if the layoff is related to the pandemic, we will say that employers will be automatically relieved of those charges. You will all qualify, and it will be automatic. You don't have to apply for it. An important caveat, and not to get too in the weeds on UC policy, but there are some employers, and you have to be eligible for this program, but it's nonprofits and public entities, municipalities and school districts generally, who don't have to pay UC taxes, can opt to just pay for benefits outright when someone gets laid off. They're known as reimbursable employers. For those employers, they were not provided relief from charges, and many of them are seeing, depending on their size, of course, massive bills coming in for their UC charges. Don't know if any of you all are in that position. It's very tough. Very, very tough to contemplate what a resolution on that front might be. Legislators have equated it to, it's insurance. If you don't purchase flood insurance and your house gets flooded, it's a little more nuanced than that. So any questions on that front, please feel free to share at the chamber, as I'm sure Eileen can empathize. We're sort of right in the middle there. We have members who are impacted by these things in many different ways. And because we're broad-based, we try our best to represent them all. And that doesn't all, that isn't always easy. But unemployment comp, as I said, has been a real focus as it's been utilized to drive support out to individuals. And as I referenced or implied earlier, we did hear and continue to hear more and more of employers who are finding that individuals are quitting their job, or as reopenings are occurring and they're offering work, they're asking their folks to come back to work. Employees are saying they're refusing work in order to remain collecting benefits. Not across the board, and I'm not saying that about everybody, but it seems to be occurring frequently enough that it's causing problems for employers, and there have been efforts at the legislative and administrative level. The Department of Labor and Industry has created a new form and a site, a page on their site for employers to report refusals to work. Technically, these individuals are prohibited from doing that. They may also be committing fraud if they refuse suitable work in order to remain collecting benefits. A little bit of a controversy back in late April. The governor at a press conference was asked what an employer should do in that situation, or can someone's benefits be cut off if they refuse work in order to continue collecting benefits. And the governor just flatly said, no, you can't cut off their benefits. And it's a real simple thing for employers. They just have to pay their people more. My phone started blowing up with employers who were just livid, beside themselves over these comments. Both the idea that a program could be kind of misused like that, but also just the idea that they've been unable to conduct business, to sell their goods and their services. They're draining their savings account. They're finally perhaps trying to get up and running and asking people to come back, and they're refusing. And the word from the governor, who's, right or wrong, his order is the reason they can't do business. He's telling them it's so simple: pay your people more. That was one of the times I experienced some real frustration and anger from employers, and we've been kind of working ever since to correct the record. The other time we really saw frustration and from the business community, and not to get too into this, the governor's shutdown order and subsequent waiver process, which we had advocated for adoption of federal guidelines, which we believed would be more uniform, be more transparent. That was not the direction the administration went. They created their own set of industries that could open or could not open, and then initiated a waiver process for employers who weren't sure. They soon had over 40,000 waivers for a few dozen state government employees to go through. That I think was our first round of our phones ringing off the hook, trying to figure out what in the world was going on. Employers saying, my waiver was rejected, but my competitor down the street was accepted. We do the exact same thing. What is happening? And I mentioned that not to, not to use this opportunity to be critical, but that in particular, from my sense, was sort of planted the seed for a lot of employers who, were already in this place of just exasperation and frustration. I think planted a little bit of a seed of distrust and skepticism that we are still seeing those impacts. And Eileen mentioned the vote from the legislature just yesterday, which we'll get into. But that to me, just speaking from my own observations, is when things started to turn, where there had been a lot of bipartisan, broad, community-wide support for efforts to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic. That I think is when at least we started seeing a lot of employers saying, what's going on here? Why can't we see what the rules are? Why is this process lacking transparency? So in the last, probably couple months since then, in terms of response measures from the state legislature, it's taken a few different forms. There have been some agreed to measures to allow state government and local government to continue operating, allowing municipal governments and zoning hearing boards and groups like that, allowing them to operate remotely, allowing notary publics to operate remotely, things like that, just to try to keep sort of the public sector gears moving as much as possible under these circumstances. We also saw some pretty broadly supported business support in terms of of grants and loans. Some of those proposals are still going through, and we just saw from the governor's office last week a $225 million small business grant program utilizing federal CARES dollars that is being rolled out, will be administered through local lending agencies. So you've had some areas where there's been broad agreement. Another sort of tranche of legislative responses have been trying to expedite reopening of the economy, both on a broad scale, so multiple bills sent to the governor, sort of as we were advocating to require adoption of federal guidelines to determine industries that were considered critical and life-sustaining and which were not. Those were vetoed. Proposals to allow for a county-by-county approach, that was also vetoed. And then a long list of individual industry-specific bills to allow various different categories of employers to resume operations. None of those bills, I would note, have actually become law. Or, almost all of them have not even advanced through the legislative process. However, a trend did develop over the course of a few weeks where we saw the legislature take action on an industry-specific bill, and sometimes within hours, but some also within a couple of days, the administration would take action to related to that industry. So the House passed a bill allowing construction to reopen. Pennsylvania was one of the few states that had completely shut down residential construction, for example. The administration then took action, this was back already, we're talking a couple months ago, to reopen construction. Same with car dealerships and the real estate industry. The legislature took action, more and more kind of bipartisan support behind these industry-specific bills, citing the experience throughout the country of these industries operating safely, and all were required to adhere to federal and state health and safety guidelines. And then the governor kind of taking action through his administrative order to open up those industries. So that has been a trend that has continued, and I guess worth kind of noting now, the latest chapter in this struggle between the administration and the legislature on reopening. The next chapter kind of came to a head yesterday with the House and Senate passing a resolution to require the governor to rescind the executive order in its entirety. Not to get too into the constitutional details here and various arguments, but essentially the legislature is saying that that the governor has to act now that they've passed the resolution to rescind the order, and that they don't even have to present the resolution to the governor. The governor is saying, you do have to present the resolution to me. And that's another way of saying, I have an opportunity, I being the governor, have an opportunity to either sign or veto the resolution, and presumably it would be vetoed. So we have a constitutional dispute that we are in the midst of, which is widely viewed to ultimately be answered by the courts. I would predict that the legislature, seeing no action from the governor, will bring litigation, will sue the administration, and the courts will have to decide. It's one more situation where this disputes between various levels of government and employers just find themselves right in the middle with more confusion, more difficulty as they're trying to keep their heads above water. So it's continues to be disappointing. We're going to be putting out a statement to our chamber community partners later this morning with kind of, I will say it, with our thoughts on this current situation. We don't have any answers. Employers should be cautious, though. I think it's fair to say that until until a resolution from the courts, we probably have to assume that the status quo is maintained. And unfortunately, the governor in the past, under similar circumstances, has kind of resorted to almost threatening employers who take action or resume operations outside of his emergency declaration, fines, revoking licenses, etc. So there's a real risk that we saw this come up a few weeks ago or a month ago when various county officials said they were going to deviate from the governor's executive order. Governor issued, some of those threats both to counties and to individual employers. So, definitely a lot of risks involved. But again, when that chapter with counties kind of going rogue, we were talking to employers, and again, it's almost surreal to think about. And I think the word surreal was used by an employer I was talking to, who totally by the book for their entire life of their company, and the fact that they were contemplating violating the governor's a governor's order, but they said, he can revoke my license if I don't open, I'm finished. And it was just one more kind of heartbreaking moment to listen to a business owner who has played it totally straight for his entire career, followed every state and federal and local law to the T, saying I'm going to violate the governor's order because I've gotten this potential opportunity from my county commissioners, and if I don't take it, that's it for me. I have to call it a career. So again, just an impossibly difficult situation that employers have been put into. That, believe it or not, is kind of a quick overview of sort of the legislative responses at various levels of government to the emergency. And that brings us to the what of course is our, I guess maybe pause there if there's any feedback or questions before we talk a little bit about bringing PA back.
Hey, Alex, this is Scott. Just wanted to ask you, after this is said and done, will the chamber be pushing for some kind of legislation to prevent a rogue governor from doing something like this again?
Well, there is legislation that has been introduced and has started through that process. At the same committee hearing where the resolution I mentioned was passed, they also passed a constitutional amendment to reform the governor's ability to declare, or not necessarily to declare an emergency declaration, but to sustain it beyond 30 days. The goal being to start involving other stakeholders, primarily the legislature, after that 30-day period. So that appears to be the real focus right now. We have not taken a position on that particular constitutional amendment. But we are certainly and have been, trying to encourage more cooperation, not just between various branches of government, but with the private sector. That has been a recurring theme of our advocacy is, you are all the ones who are on the ground. You understand your workplaces, your employees, what you're capable of. At a minimum, your input must be sought. It is the only way to help ensure a positive outcome from a public policy standpoint, and we just we haven't really seen that. Of course you understand with an executive in a in the midst of an emergency, of a health emergency, and trying to take action to protect the public health and save lives, but in order to ensure as best outcomes from both a health and an economic standpoint, input from the business community is just essential. So we will absolutely be engaged going forward on, you know, as we review how this process has played out over the last few months, how it can be improved and done differently. If God forbid we find ourselves in a similar position, if it's in the fall, if there's a resurgence or something else down the road. So that, that brings us to, what at the PA Chamber we are focusing on in terms of allowing employers and our economy to rebound, and our Bringing PA Back initiative. And I encourage you to go to bringingpaback.com. That is focused on a few areas. And none of it, frankly, none of it is really, reinventing the wheel in some cases, but trying to be as helpful to employers as possible. So providing information both from public sector and private sector sources on what employers need to know as they begin to resume operations, whether you're talking CDC or OSHA or the State Department of Health. There are myriad new requirements on employers on how they must safeguard their workplaces to protect employees, customers, vendors, anyone who comes onto their premises. And understanding those is important. So we're providing both the official guidelines as well as best practices, and how an employer can go from guideline to to actual implementation as smoothly and as cost effectively as possible. We also include there a number of financial resources that might be available for employers. A big focus of Bringing PA Back is a legislative agenda, legislative initiatives that we believe will help facilitate an economic recovery. Covers a number of different areas, and I won't go bill by bill. But as I mentioned at the onset, employers, especially in this situation, the most talented, nimble employers are still finding themselves in this impossible position where they're unable to really conduct business as they typically had. And we do believe that legislation to help address some of the concerns that have been raised will be critically important. One that I will highlight, and it's our top priority from an advocacy standpoint at the moment, is related to liability protections, safe harbor protections. As I mentioned, employers are required to adhere to many new health and safety requirements under multiple levels of government. Our concern, and it's not based on theory because we have experiences already and we are seeing it grow, are unwarranted lawsuits brought against employers based on an individual who has contracted the virus and for one reason or another believes that it occurred at a particular business. The nature of a pandemic as it relates to litigation like this is really, it's kind of paradoxical. It's probably impossible to prove that an individual, with some exceptions, but generally speaking, impossible to prove that an individual contracted a pandemic at a particular location. A pandemic, by definition, is kind of everywhere. But that should give very little comfort to any employer because it's also equally impossible to disprove it. And we are seeing, some in the plaintiffs, law firm community who understand that dynamic and are taking advantage of it to bring lawsuits against businesses. I'm sure hoping that, employers will try to settle a case quickly to get it, so that it's just not one more impediment keeping them from fully recovering. But we think it's totally unacceptable. The governor about a month ago issued an executive order. We had been pushing him as governors across the country have done, including including, not to get political, but Democratic governors have passed broad liability protections. The governor passed an executive order, or issued an executive order related to liability protections for healthcare providers treating COVID-19 patients in hospitals. I guess we're pleased that there was some attention paid to this, but that, based on feedback from our friends in the medical community and the hospital community, that is way, way, way too narrow. It doesn't cover doctors or healthcare providers treating patients in any other type of facility, which is many. I mean, we've heard estimates that this order only covers about 50% of providers in Pennsylvania. Critically, it doesn't cover the hospitals either. So the Hospital Association is pushing for additional protections. We have manufacturers who may have reoriented their facilities in order to produce personal protective equipment, PPE, or other materials that were critical to the response. They are seeing situations where they could be targeted with lawsuits, based on their operations. They need protection. And then, kind of, as I mentioned at the onset here, the more general premise liability for companies or workplaces that, many of whom have remained open during this entire time, grocery stores, pharmacies, etc., who are now being sued because someone contracted the virus. And, in some cases, we're being told, an attorney recruited them and is trying to bring as many lawsuits as they can, which is disappointing. Individuals who contract the virus should have a strong set of support, both from a health standpoint and an economic standpoint, to make sure that they can deal with it as well as possible. But that should not come in the form of a lawsuit against an employer, assuming based on the so long as they have been adhering to all relevant federal and state health and safety guidelines. So this initiative is being advocated at both the federal and the state level. We have a broad support chamber community letter that we're putting together. We have around 70 chambers that have signed on, which is a very strong showing of support from the chamber community. So I wanted to make sure to really emphasize that, because it's our top legislative priority from through our Bringing PA Back initiative. Finally, I'll just briefly hit on the elections coming up, or we just had, and a kind of a political update. Big picture in Harrisburg, obviously, Governor Wolf is a Democrat. Republicans are in the majority in both the House and the Senate. Republicans have a 110 to 93 majority in the House, a 29 and a 28 to 21 majority in the Senate, with one independent who usually joins with the Republicans. Some of the noteworthy, and I'm curious your take in your area. Saw a number of incumbents in this primary last week. A number of incumbents who lost their bid to be renominated. A handful in Philadelphia, in particular. Some fairly long-term House members. 2 state senators, one in your area, Montgomery County, who lost his reelection bid, and setting up for some interesting elections come November, no doubt about it. Important to note that 2 of the most powerful legislators in Harrisburg are retiring. The top Republican in the Senate, and also the third-ranking public official in Pennsylvania, the president pro tempore, Joe Scarnati, who's from out in sort of northwestern central area. The districts get bigger and bigger when you get to that part of Pennsylvania. He is retiring, so there's going to be a leadership shakeup in the Senate, and the Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai, is also retiring. And there are rumors that there might be an announcement this week where he may be kind of concluding his legislative career even before the end of the session. I don't like to be a rumor mongerer, but that's what we're reading. So also a shakeup in the House in terms of leadership, which is important from a business standpoint. And those are both figures in Pennsylvania politics. Who've been involved in so many different initiatives. Both, generally speaking, have been very solid pro-business legislative leaders and votes with whom the PA Chamber has shared, good relationships over the years. I'm confident we will have similar, good interactions with future leaders, but definitely an interesting time in the state capitol in Harrisburg as some longtime leadership is retiring. So with that, I'm happy to open it up to, again, feedback from you all or any questions on either public policy or the political side or bringing PA back. But I really, again, just thank you for the opportunity to be with you all this morning.
Yeah, Alex, this is Scott again. Do you think you can contribute those incumbent politicians who lost the primaries? Do you think it had to do with them, favoring Governor Wolf with the shutdown to the level they did versus, just bringing somebody else in? Do you think that had anything to do with it?
Well, the incumbents I'm thinking of, and I am no expert on Philadelphia politics. I don't think that was necessarily a factor. I think in a lot of cases you had, not to be overly simplistic, but you had Democrats who were being kind of targeted from the left. And from my standpoint, it's always interesting when I think about, a particular legislator who's being challenged, in this case, challenged from the left. These are legislators who, in some cases have a 0% voting record with the chamber and with the business community. These are not legislators that I would consider moderates or, willing to work with the business community. And I'm not, we're disappointed with anyone who doesn't vote with the business community, but I'm not saying this to trash on them. That's the kind of district they represent. That's the type of legislator they've decided to be. But they're rock solid votes for their caucuses. But I think oftentimes it's a difference in style, or there are some local dynamics at play. So you have a House member, Jim Roebuck, who I think has been since the 80s has represented his district in Philadelphia, who lost a re-election bid. State Senator Larry Farnese, not a friend at all of the business community or the PA Chamber. And I think in a lot of circles, he would say that with pride. He has lost his re-election bid. So I did not hear anything from those campaigns or elections. They have been, and I'm going through my list of incumbents who likely lost. I should note with the paper ballots and the new mail ballot option, a lot of these elections are still not finalized yet. But I can't think of any Democrat who lost in a primary based on not being completely behind the governor in terms of responding to the pandemic, just other dynamics at play. Yeah, you all in Montgomery County have a State Senator Dalen Leach who appears that he has lost his election bid. I would guess there were other factors at play there besides emergency pandemic response. You've been reading the papers the last couple of years. I think other factors at play. But again, it's not, from a PA Chamber standpoint, we're not losing any, friends of the chamber, to be totally candid with you.
Alex, the resolution that was passed last night, there's been a lot of information put out. Who knows whether it's right or whether it's wrong? But that Wolf was going to veto it, and then I heard or I read this morning that it's called a concurrent resolution, which doesn't require the governor's signature, and therefore his veto is pointless. And so it's a done deal according to that side. The governor's side is that, that's not the way it works. How does it work?
I think I'm losing connection. I'm sorry. We gotta wrap up. Jim, I don't know. We just not to get into a whole different issue, but there's a proposal from the governor that's been around for a couple of years to expand overtime eligibility. I know that's a big, can get into that if there's time. The legislature just recently passed a concurrent resolution to rescind this overtime, or to disapprove of this overtime proposal, which the governor vetoed. And we're now we're now dealing with that. So, when that was going through and we've been heavily engaged on that front, I thought I had a handle on concurrent resolutions, which are pretty rare. But in that case, it was presented to the governor and he vetoed. In this case, it's being claimed from the legislature that, based on, I think, a combination of case law and the particular statute they're referencing, that the governor is required to act without the resolution being presented. And he's saying it's not. I don't know. I don't know, Jim. And I don't think anyone can really, claim clearly what the answer is until the courts decide.
Well, talk about a hot time in the old town tonight. There's going to be some stuff going on in Harrisburg today.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's been an interesting week between this, everything that happened yesterday. Monday's House session was basically canceled after a number of legislators, had a demonstration during House proceedings. Just an interesting time to be an observer of the state legislature, to say the least.
Thank you.
Alex. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Alex. My name is Lisa. I own the Swamp Door. It's an antique store in Gilbertsville. Small, but not too small. My question for you is that after all of us have been paying close attention to the opportunities, and I put that in quotes, that government on the local, state, national levels have been trying to give to small businesses for grants or loans, not all of them working out. In my case, almost none of them working out. We see yesterday that the governor makes an announcement about, additional funds that may be available. I confess, I did not watch the video because at this point I'm waiting for tangible information. And I wondered if you had any, because what I was told from a local friend in government is to reach out to our local representatives for more information. It does sound to me like this is going to be some kind of initiative that's going through banks, but do you have any further information? Because at this point, it all sounds like it feels like pantomime. It just feels like they're going through the motions of saying, hey, we're helping small business, but at the smallest levels, maybe not so much. And I just wondered if you had any insight for us.
Well, first, I appreciate the frustration. I'm just sorry. I'm sorry for any business in Pennsylvania, but to you, Lisa, that the efforts that have been attempted haven't always haven't worked out as intended. It's very difficult. The Federal CARES Act did provide funding to states, and states have the opportunity, which it sounds like they're utilizing, to provide grants to small businesses. You noted the announcement from the governor's office of a $225 million grant program. I've heard as well, and I think it's been reported that the intention is to drive those dollars out to local economic development or community lending institutions. So the questions become, what guidelines and application requirements and eligibility requirements are set by the State Department of Community and Economic Development, and what discretion is given at the local lending level, and is there going to be some combination of both? My understanding, and gosh, if I had a nickel every time I've given an answer like this over the last few months, I'd be giving out my own grant program. But we are waiting for further guidance from both DCED and the and local lenders on how that program will roll out and what the application will look like. At the same time, to kind of further complicate it, the legislature has taken up, and the House is expected to pass today, a small business grant program with some of its own requirements. So it's not clear to me what the legislature is attempting to do matches up with what the governor has attempted to do. I don't want to further complicate things. So if I were you, I'd focus on additional guidance from the administration, from DCED, and then ultimately how they will allow local lenders to kind of put their own parameters around a program. So I wish I had a more clear answer for you at this point. We're encouraged to see that they're moving on rolling out those dollars, and we'll certainly push for clarity and ensuring that those dollars are driven to folks like you for whom they're intended.
I was looking for some information, and I'll be getting it out to the membership this week, Alex, but off the top of my head, the PA, I was on the call the other week with the PA Chamber and the group that has the Pennsylvania grant program.
Yeah.
So, if we can share that, like I said, I was just looking through some papers to see if I could find the exact website for it. Yeah. But there is a group in Pennsylvania that has pulled some money together, and they are doing small loans for businesses. So is it?
Forgivable loans, yeah.
Yes.
I think it's PA 30-day fund.
Yes, that's what I think it was too.
It's 30 the number. I think they're flat $3,000 loans, which are intended to be grants. It's kind of like if you can pay it back to be used for another business, right. Great. If not, understand. Their whole thing, and we had them on a call with our chamber community partners. They're trying to make it a quick application. Pretty clear eligibility rules. They want a video kind of explaining, why you need it. $3,000, so not nothing, but also not, maybe not sort of life altering, but definitely check it out. PA 30-day fund, PA 30-day fund.
Like I said, I'll be sending that information out. So sorry, Lisa, what?
That's okay. No, that's okay. I actually have experience with that. I found out about that a little later than some of my contemporaries locally, and I did apply. I think they're overwhelmed. My feeling about that is that when I applied, the entire thing shut down. And that was my experience. It may be that particular day, after spending the time to apply for it, it's simply there was some kind of a glitch, or it may simply be that there are literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of businesses applying at the same time.
They were telling us, I'm sorry to hear that.
That's okay.
One more
it's okay.
frustration.
No, I mean, these are the things that happen, and you keep trying. That's the point, is you keep trying. But my experience was that I wasn't able to get through after making the application, and still haven't heard it.
Okay.
That's okay.
Lisa,
I just want people to be
what,
aware. It may not be, it may be uneven, just like everything right now. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And we can give that feedback. They, as recently as a couple weeks ago, were saying, they have the money.
Yeah.
They have folks. They've recruited Penn Wharton school students to review applications. They're like, all we need are the businesses to apply, and that's where we're coming up short. Maybe they were too successful with awareness, and now, they're dealing with a rush. So hopefully they
It could
get
have just
back
been
on.
my experience. Yeah, I mean, we have to make allowances, as you said. Yeah.
Lisa, I have to say, I'm kind of inspired and just appreciate your positive demeanor and kind of patience after what has got to be just, one frustration after another. So you've inspired this, business lobbyist. So thank you.
Well, Alex,
Thank
if
you for all that
the
you
next
do.
time we have you down for a meeting or for a presentation, we'll definitely have to make sure to get you over. Lisa has a great little shop. So it is something for everybody, really, right, Lisa? I mean, there's probably something anyone can find there. So
I'd love to. I'm gonna hold you to that, Eileen.
that would be great. Well, it is 10:30. I don't want to keep everyone. I do want to thank Alex so much for your time. Again, I think it's just good for people to hear. There's been a lot of information that comes at everybody, and I know trying to dissect it and weed it out and try and figure out what pertains to you is sometimes difficult. So I appreciate an overview of just kind of everything that's been happening for the last couple of months, and I'll continue to use the resources the PA Chamber keeps providing to us to share with our membership. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you found today helpful. Alex did mention early in the conversation about the PPP and the pieces that we're shifting with the PPP loan and the forgiveness. We actually have a chamber member accounting firm, Kreischer Miller, who reached out. They're doing an information session virtually tomorrow for us at 9 a.m. That you can register online through the chamber. So if you have not already and want to participate in that session, please feel free to join us for that. But again, that's tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and that is strictly focused on the PPP forgiveness. So, all right. Anybody have any other questions for Alex before we let you get on with your day? Okay. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks again. Good being with you.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.